Hi, this is Lauren Cheek from Lornicopia, and I wanted to do a quick video for the interest of people who are younger and have no idea or not a great idea of what life was like, say, in the 1880s and the 1900s through the Depression. And a lot of my family members grew up during that time, and I have pictures of them, and I'd like to give you an idea of what their lives were like. So first I'm going to start out with my dad's side of the family. So let me turn the camera around and get it focused. Okay, this is my dad's side of the family right here. Not all of them. If you look all the way over to the right of the screen, the guy with the beard, that is my grandfather's father. Now, my grandfather was born in 1880 after the Civil War. The guy that you see with the beard there with the kids, standing behind him is my grandfather. The lady with the baby in her lap, or the young child in her lap, is his wife, Fanny. And then those are his kids around him, and then other kids are spread throughout. But what's interesting about this side of the family is they came from North Georgia to Middle Georgia to become tenant farmers. And if I back up, all of these people in this photo came together on a wagon train. I always thought they would have just trained down from the mountains, but no, they actually took a wagon. It took them several days to get from North Georgia to Middle Georgia to tenant farm. And then eventually my grandfather was able to buy his own farm. The girl that's right next to him on his left, our right, is my Aunt Lois, and she was blind, and I knew her growing up. And then these are all the other kids, and I can tell you their names. The little boy that is in my grandmother's lap is most likely Jefferson, and Jefferson died at about 3 years old. And kids died actually quite a bit during those days. So my family, my dad's family, had a high success rate of survival of children. They had 11 children. I think they had 12 children and 11 lived to adulthood. Let me see, there's 5 boys and I think 6 girls. I have to go through the whole list in my head. Anyway, that's his side of the family. But the way they lived their life, which is fascinating, is, for instance, Grandma had this house. And I'm going to show you a picture of this house because somebody painted it, and it's in the other room. When they finally did buy their farm, which is after my dad was born, which was during the middle of the Depression, this is basically what the house looked like. It had 2 chimneys on the side, 4 rooms on the inside, and all of the kids lived together. And then your kitchen was detached in the back, so it wouldn't burn the house down. But of course, nobody had indoor plumbing. You didn't have electricity. You didn't have TV. They did get electricity later because by World War II, they were able to listen to radio and stuff like that. But they still didn't have indoor plumbing. So they had outhouses. They had a smokehouse where they would, smoke the hogs, hang them up, and smoke the meat. And they grew cotton. And predominantly cotton was their product that they grew, that they sold, and it's how, some of the older kids were put through college, etc., etc. Now I'm going to show you a picture of the boys. You saw them as children, but these are my uncles. And all of my dad's side of the family served in the military. My dad was too young to serve in World War II, but every single one of the boys served in World War II. And in fact, Sanders, who is here, he served in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. Some of the other boys served in Korea as well. And Dad was in the military during Korea, but being the youngest child, they always sent him to Canada, which is where I was born. Although I'm not Canadian, I was born there. My parents are both Americans. But to give you an idea how tough things were during the Depression, they were boiling their clothes in a big cauldron, for instance. You didn't have as many clothes. They all plowed the fields behind a mule and physically plowed with a mule to create the furrows to plant the stuff. Everything was very, very hard. You had to know how to make soap. You had to know how to, like the girls, knew how to sew. You had to have chopped wood, fell trees, all that kind of stuff. So Dad's family was in the South. Mom's family was a little bit better off, but of course nobody was well off during the Depression, and you ate what you didn't want to sell. So Dad's family was so poor that when I asked each of my uncles individually, except for Bill, because I never got a chance to have that conversation with Bill, and Bill's the one right here, but all the other boys, when I asked them, what made you want to go into the military during World War II? And they said, there was food. No joke. Food was enough to take a bullet for. Of course, they were patriotic and everything else, and there was a lot going on in that war. But really, their biggest motivation was to get off the farm and get some food. And my dad and his brothers all said that their health improved greatly when they got into the military, because in the military they were taking the food and feeding the soldiers. So, but they all served in Europe. One of the uncles served in Burma Road. Another uncle, Johnny, flew, bombers, and as well as Herman. They were all in the military. And then they got out later, and I knew them as old men. My dad is 39 years older than me. My mother was 38 years older than me. They're both deceased now. I'm 50, so you can imagine. They both died about somewhere around 10, 12 years ago. But anyway, this is my mom. Now, if you can imagine, my mother is 16 in this picture. Very, very, very beautiful, but grew up quick. But now Mom's side of the family, her grandfather on her father's side owned a mill, and then he became a pioneer down to Ottumwa, Iowa. And he came through Kentucky and pioneered there. And then her father inherited from, well, it was her great grandfather that was a pioneer, and her grandfather. But they had some money and they bought some land. And her father's family only had three or four children. The girls all went to college, which is highly unusual during that day. But I definitely know there were two boys, and one of the boys lived well into old age, and he never got married. And then the other one, my grandfather got married, and he had boys, one boy and I think 5 girls. It was like 6 kids altogether. And this is another funny thing. Grandma and Grandpa, I actually had this conversation with my grandmother, which is kind of unusual because she could be a little bit, she grew up during the Victorian era and, was an adult during the Depression and World War II. So she had a very almost Victorian modesty about a lot of things that she did. But I actually did find out that they had condoms during that day, and that grandma used condoms to keep from having more children because you couldn't feed them, And of course, nobody in my family, at least not in those generations, were going to have an abortion. So, that was something that was kind of cool about that. But let me show you some pictures of them real quick. So this is Sherman and Susie. They made all their own clothes. So everything that you see in the picture, Susie made. Susie was younger than Sherman. They're the ones that inherited a little bit of money from his father. And Sherman was alive during the Civil War, to give you an idea of his age. Now, this is Sherman's son, my grandfather, and his wife, my grandmother. And they were born, I want to say 1908, maybe 1910. I'd have to look it up, but it was right the first decade of the 1900s. So, she grew up during that flapper hair era. You can see that she's wearing the bob. Actually, you can see that influence a little bit in this picture of my great-grandmother and grandfather. She's wearing a little bit of the, late Victorian, early, 1910 style. But anyway, yes, so they all made their clothes and everything. But then, during the Depression, this is a picture of my grandmother, the woman that was in the picture that's married to my grandfather, her mom and dad, and her brothers and sisters, all wearing clothes that they made out of flour sacks and stuff during the Depression. And of course, they had a car. I think I was told that this was a Model A, not a Model T. But anyway, so pretty fascinating. But yeah, so the early part of the century got rough after World War One, and I don't think my grandfathers were of the appropriate age of adulthood, or they were too old to serve in World War One. So a lot of people in my family served in Korea or during the Korea era, were in the military, or they were old enough to be in World War II. So, for instance, in my dad's family, all the boys were younger than the girls. So I had a generation, all these boys, right in time to go to World War II. But anyway, just to give you an idea of what life was like, like I said, my grandmother and grandfather on my mom's side did have tractors. And in fact, my mother hijacked my grandfather's tractor one day with her brother. They rode it to school. She got into a lot of trouble for that. She was a little bit of a wild child. I take after her, but I'm not too crazy. But yeah, a lot of my personality is kind of like hers. But anyway, but yeah, they, on my mom's side of the family, told me, like the aunts who are still alive because they were younger than my mother. One of my aunts, just two of my aunts have passed away on that side. But some of the girls are still alive and I still talk to them on Facebook and stuff. But what I deduced from going to visit them, I realized that they were predominantly vegetarian during the period that was the Depression, because you sold off all your eggs, you sold off all your meat, you sold off anything of value just to pay the bills, and then you ate the beans and you ate the things that you could grow and the vegetables and things like that, and you would occasionally eat chicken. But that was a special thing. I know on Dad's side of the family, Dad said that his father would invite a pastor from church to the house to eat. My grandmother on my dad's side would say, "What am I going to feed him? We've got these kids." And they'd figure out a way to feed him, making biscuits and gravy and stuff. My mom's family, all of them, except for my mother. My mother was not a domestic. She raised children and everything, but she didn't have that edge. She was a singer and wanted to be an entertainer and had a bunch of kids and never did. But she definitely had the talent and everything. But Mom was more of she was more of I would say like a entertainer type person. She cussed like a sailor when she wanted to. She's very feminine, very beautiful, but she did not learn all of those skills. Now, she did know how to cook and do things later in life. She adapted that. But when we were kids, she was not really like a great cook. I mean, she didn't sew. All of her sisters could sew outfits from, like a pattern and do all this. And that's on my dad and my mom's side. Both sides of the family are very close to the earth and know how to do a lot of things. But anyway, so that's just a little tidbit of what life was like during the Depression and World War II. So I hope you enjoyed that. It's more for family, but if you like it, enjoy.